A plan was put forth by the CIA to train Islamic fighters in the Afghan war against Russia in a new form of radical Islamic thinking. The concept was to teach the Mujahadeen that the Russians were not just attacking their country, they were attacking their faith. During that period, large numbers of fighters came to Afghanistan to help in the struggle, and large training camps were set up and run by the CIA to accommodate them. The man who was selected to lead the mercenaries by the CIA was one Osama Bin Laden, who was given the code name Tim Osman, which was used on trips made to Washington to lobby for funds. The trip to Washington was made by Bin Laden on at least 2 occasions. During this period, the CIA taught this new form of radical Islamic thinking and provided terrorist training to hundreds of thousands of Islamic fighters, being careful to also keep a comprehensive database on all the people that they had trained. The Arabic name for this terrorist database was Al-Qaeda. Concerned over this new form of radical Islamism and the sheer volume of fighters the CIA was turning out, then Pakistani Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto wrote to the director of the CIA and cautioned him openly, saying in her letter, "You are creating Frankenstein."
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
But her warnings went unheeded. They were not heeded because a radical network of extremists was exactly what the CIA had wished to create right from the very beginning. For without such a radical network of terrorists, the long-planned war on terror would never have been possible. In 2000, a neoconservative think tank called the Project for the New American Century released a document entitled Rebuilding America's Defenses. Outlined in that document was a plan for full-spectrum dominance of the globe. Air, land, sea, space, the internet, everything. In that document it said, and I quote, "The process of transformation, even if it brings about a revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor." 1 year after George W. Bush gained office, in the most contested election in US history, and many prominent members of PNAC were given positions in his administration, America experienced its new Pearl Harbor, and the entire PNAC plan was put into effect. Coincidence? When the events of September the 11th, 2001 unfolded, the troops were already there waiting to go into Afghanistan, and the Patriot Act and Homeland Security legislation had already long been drawn up. They were already there, just waiting for the right event in order to introduce them. So when 9/11 happened, cui bono? Who benefited? Afghanistan? Iraq? Did any Arab country? No. But the Bush administration was given an open checkbook with which to take control of the Afghani poppy fields, the Iraqi oil fields, and the oil-rich and natural gas-rich Caspian Basin. And all protest to the invasions of the two countries was squashed before it started. Then the 7/7 bombings in London occurred, and again, who benefited? Islamism? Hardly. But support for the war in Iraq knew no bounds. The Blair government secured a massive increase in police and military funding, and was also able to install thousands of domestic surveillance cameras throughout England. And then, amid massive war protests in Australia, we saw the Bali bombing, and yet again, who benefited? A Muslim cleric who suddenly found himself wanted by the CIA and the centre of world attention? No, but all anti-war protests in Australia suddenly dissipated. The Australian Prime Minister John Howard received a huge boost in popularity, The Australian police got to establish themselves as the local police of the entire Australasian region, and both the Australian and the Indonesian military secured massive increases in funding. So who really benefited? The real facts, and as can be seen clearly by examining the evidence in all three cases, is that each one of these so-called terrorist attacks was a false flag operation designed to remove more rights from the people of Western countries, and to further consolidate the hold the international banking elite has over our world. The information on all these cases exists. It's out there in the public domain. Please do the research, because the media is just not telling you. A large portion of Al-Qaeda funding comes from the Pakistani ISI, and it still does. And yet the ISI is an openly admitted and funded wing of the CIA. The CIA created hundreds of thousands of extremists and trained them in radical Islamic thinking, and it kept a database on them all. All these extremists still receive funding from the CIA channeled to them via the ISI and don't even realize who they are funded by. Osama Bin Laden has been a CIA asset right from the start, and when the US decided to go after Bin Laden, they used the name of the CIA database as a terrorist organization. The war on terror is fake. It's a setup. There is no global network of terrorists waiting around every corner to blow everybody up. It's a myth. All the bombings are carefully orchestrated and follow a noticeable pattern, and you are never given the true facts or an objective look at the evidence in any one of these cases. And just think about it. A few years ago, no one had ever heard of Al-Qaeda. Yet now, almost every mishap in the world is blamed on them, and yet no one can seem to find any of them. Occasionally, some CIA asset that we've never seen before comes on the screen and says a few condemning words, and we're supposed to take that as confirmation. Can you see how easy it is for them to pull this scam off simply by controlling the media? And while people have been distracted and living in fear of terrorism, international law enforcement borders have been slowly eroded away. For example, to clean up after the recent tornadoes in America, Canadian soldiers were used. Australian and Indonesian police now routinely train together. And now remember here that Indonesian police have a reputation for being amongst the most brutal in the world. And yet here we have Indonesian and Australian police swapping ideas and methods. Many people have been trained to think that to talk about this stuff is to be anti-American. But nothing could be further from the truth. The perpetrators of all of this are based mainly in England and Europe. They are just using the military might of America to carry out their plans because they have usurped the American government. American President George W. Bush all but subverted the entire US Constitution, and he robbed the country blind. However, it must be understood that it is not America itself doing this. The people who are doing this have set themselves up globally. Remember the words of JFK.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine